my teacher came to me and he said something. That we came together to build a family, but you destroyed it on the first day. My heart just started pounding. Why? Because I see hundreds of people looking and everyone's face has changed. All eyes on me, but in a way like, what are you doing? So I was, I believe, 13 years of age. And when people ask me a lot of the times, how old is you when you took Deen seriously and you started your journey of learning the Deen and these kind of things, it was this moment which I believe gave me that kickstart. It motivated me to truly take things more seriously, to almost not be made a fool out of. So I believe I was around 13 years of age, and I grew up in and around the area of Masjid Dar es Salaam Masjid in Southall.
That was back there. See, you grew up in India, Somalia.
Middle, yeah, something like that. There weren't as many Somalis then as well, basically Israelites. But this community, I actually obviously didn't live in the area, but that was the mission that I've always go to. And the way I started my journey was as soon as I finished school, like literally as soon as I finished school, I would run to the masjid, jump on the bus, go straight to the masjid. I had my school uniform on, everything, etc. My parents initially actually thought that I was getting indoctrinated in the wrong way and becoming extreme, etc. It truly this exactly that, because I would go and I would stay there to Isha Salah, and then I would get picked up, or I would come home myself. The majority of times I'd go home myself, but I'd come home at 8 p.m, 9 p.m, wearing the school uniform, etc. Where was you all this time? You left 8 a.m. this morning. Now I would come to the masjid to do different things. I would play games and I would sometimes read the Qur'an, and I was doing different things. So it wasn't strictly during that period to memorize the Qur'an. But where things started was the Imam of the masjid one day saw me, Sheikh Abdul Ahad, and he came to me, he said, young boy, you come to the masjid ever so often, I see you every single day, and I've seen you read the Qur'an sometimes. Have you memorized the Qur'an? I said, no, I've not memorized the Qur'an. Do you have a teacher? I said, no, I don't have a teacher. He said, around, I'd say 12 and a half, 13 years of age. I can't remember the exact age. No, that's rough. I think around 14 years of age. And then he said to me, would you like to memorize the Qur'an? I said, is that something I could do? I said, yes, of course. That's when he took me under his wing, and he basically said, I'll teach you the Qur'an, inshallah. Come on. So we spoke to my father. He said, look, your son, he comes to the masjid often, etc. I want to basically teach him the Qur'an. So my journey memorizing the Qur'an started with this teacher just seeing me often come to the masjid and just somewhat offering me the opportunity to be taught the Qur'an. I went ahead with it. I said, yes, inshallah. A few months into my journey, I got to the third juz of the Qur'an, juz qad sama'. So there's me, mashallah, very confident. Confidence is getting more. I'm getting used to memorizing the Qur'an. I'm getting used to the method that works best for me. I'm starting to love it and enjoy it more as well. So what happened then was, there was a day where there was a wedding taking place in the masjid. There was a nikah. Someone was getting married. So there was a nikah ceremony that was taking place in the masjid. And that's what often happens, of course. So I was there that day, running around, young Abdul Ahad, 14 years of age, perhaps 13. Can't remember exactly again how old I was. As I was there, hundreds of people in the masjid. It was a very big wedding as well. I can't remember who it was, but it was a huge wedding. Even in the masjid, the nikah ceremony. They set up the table. It was after Dhuhr Salah. It was a Wednesday. I remember the day very, very well. They set up the table. The Imam, he came to sit down. The wali was there. Everyone else. Everyone's sitting on the floor. And as we know, they begin with the recitation of the Qur'an to open the ceremony. And then what happened was, the person who was assigned to recite the Qur'an didn't turn up. Either he didn't turn up or he was running late, but he couldn't recite. That was the point. Now the Imam had to appoint someone, of course, to, open the ceremony with the recitation of the Qur'an. So they look around, they said it. And at that time, I used to leave some salahs, even though I was 14 years of age. Sometimes the Imam would let me leave the Tarawih salah sometimes. Even sometimes the normal salawat, the Maghrib salah, and they read something basic. I was known in the masjid as the young boy who's memorizing the Qur'an, and he's always there and in the masjid, and he's always memorizing and learning, etc. That's what I somewhat became known for. So what happened was, the Imam told me, Abdul Ahad, come here. He took me to the corner. He said, I want you to recite and open the ceremony. It's some Qur'an, inshallah. At that time, I was on the third juz. People who are currently memorizing the Qur'an will know, whenever you're told to read or recite a portion of the Qur'an in a gathering, we've all been there. Can you recite some Qur'an for us, inshallah? Could be a wedding. It could be just a normal gathering in a house or whatever. People normally pick one of two, maybe one of three. Either the place that they're the most confident on, or the place that they love the most. They hear these verses the most, and they're very inclined to these verses of the Qur'an, so they like these verses. Or thirdly, which is what I done, recite a portion of the Qur'an that you most recently memorized. And I'm smiling because I remembered what happened now. And the reason why people do this is because they're not going to make a mistake on it. If you literally recited to your teacher 2 days ago a portion of the Qur'an, and you're on around that page or around that juz even, you confidently recite this portion in front of anyone. So I said to my teacher, I said, Wallahi, Ustadh, I can't, I don't know the verses about what's it called, marriage. I haven't got to these surahs, and because I was a bit familiar with the Quran. I used to read the translation of the Quran a lot as well. I used to read a lot of the translation. The majority of the Quran that I used to read was in the English language. I read the Quran from the beginning to the end in the English language over 7 or 8 times before that age. Absolutely. So I was familiar. I said, Sheikh, there's no verses talking about marriage in the first 3, what's it called, as in nikah and marriage and the blessings. I said, that's in Surah Baqarah and what's it called, Surah Rum and Surah Nur, for example, and āyah, etc. So I said, Sheikh, I don't know verses to recite. He said, the Quran is barakah. I want you to read anything, inshallah. It's hundreds of people sitting there. I said, you know what? I recently read this to him. The surah that I last read to him was this. I'm just going to read that. So I get up on the microphone. Everyone's sitting down. There was a lot of mashayikh there as well, and a lot of people of the general mass, and young people, old people mixed. It was a Somali nikah as well. The thing about Somalis is they all know the Quran. When I say they all know the Quran, I mean, it's rare to see a Somali person who doesn't know, especially the first 3 edges. Also, a lot of the Somalis, they know the meaning of the Quran. When I was in Somalia, very profound. I've got a clip of this, actually. I recorded it. I was in a taxi. I was reciting some Quran in the cab on my way home from my class. And then the taxi driver, normal man, doesn't have a big beard. He's not wearing a thobe. He's not a sheikh. He's not normal. Your normal, I don't want to say Tum the Gari. I say your normal Muhammad al Ismail, etc. He heard the verses I was reciting. And he said, do you know the tafsir of these verses? And he gave the tafsir of these verses that I was reading, that whole page, in fact. The way the Somalis do it, they have a method called laqbain, where they would go through the translation word for word. So they say, amma, regarding what? Yatasa'aluna, do they ask each other? Anyan naba'i, regarding the news. Al-azimi, that news which is great. And then when they mention this sheikh said this, and that sheikh said this tafsir says that, it would give you benefits. So Somalis know, a lot of Somalis know the meaning of the Quran, and they memorize the
So the meaning of the Quran literacy has been en masse.
Absolutely. And I'm saying your general mass, your normal mother who's just a housewife, then she's not sheikh or anything like that. La. Your normal brother who works in a normal shop, someone who runs a business, you all know the Quran. Allahumma barik. May Allah raise them and raise their status and make them from Israel octopod as well. So that's the context. That's the audience that you're reciting. That's the audience I'm reciting to you. But this was the day things changed for me. Wallahi. And even my motivation changed. And I was like, I need to learn the whole Quran, number one. And more importantly, I need to know what I'm reciting. Because at that time I didn't know Arabic. So I've got up a microphone and I said, I'm going to read what I just read a few days ago. So, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها النبي إذا طلقتم النساء فطلقوهن لعدتهن وأحصوا العدة. When I stopped there, my heart just started pounding. Why? Because I see hundreds of people looking and everyone's face has changed. Oh, okay. Everyone's face was like, what is he doing? Why is he reciting these verses? Like, I could see there was a sense of uncomfort. People came for happiness. People came for joy. People came to start a new family. And everyone was just looking at me. I don't know, everyone, I would say 70% of the audience. All eyes on me, but in a way like, what are you doing? And my teacher was next to me. I couldn't see him, but later on he came to me and said something, which I'll get onto inshallah. Anyway, I just continued. I was hoping to recite the whole page, perhaps, the first page of that surah. I recited 2-3 verses. And then I just said, Sadaqallahu al-Azim. And I went in the corner and I started to burst into tears. When I bursted into tears, my teacher came to me, one of my teachers. He's a teacher who teaches tafsir of the Qur'an. He wasn't teaching tafsir to us at that time, but he's a specialist in tafsir. He came to me and he said something. Abdul Ahad, we came together to build a family, but you destroyed it on the first day. I said, is that why people are looking at me? Why? What happened? And then he said to me, the verses you're reciting, and Somalis, by the way, they're very direct. The element of being soft and kind and it's just, we're trying to build a house based on the taqwa of Allah and a Muslim household, or based on love and mawadda and compassion, and you destroyed it the first night. I said, why? What happened? He said, you recited verses speaking about divorce. You said, Ya ayyuhan nabi, O Prophet of Allah, when you divorce, your wife is divorced him like this, X, Y, and Z. You recited verses about divorce on the day of nikah and marriage. That is when things clicked and I was like, I cannot do this. I have to become serious. I have to memorize the entire Quran. I was already, of course, memorizing because I got to the 3rd juz. I was never motivated enough to know the in-depth meaning of every single verse in the Quran and to actually complete the memorization of the Quran. So what happened after that, maybe a year later or something, I go to Surah Rum and there was another nikah. This time it was not in the masjid, but my teacher was also there. And he said, Abdul Ahad, we want you to recite, inshallah. And this time I knew, of course, verses to do with, marriage, etc., etc. And he said to me, do you remember that day? A year ago, what happened? It was like a year and a half or something like that. Do you remember that event? I said, Sheikh, I have not forgotten that at all. And that is still with me. He said, make sure you don't do the same thing again. So alhamdulillah, this time we read وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِنْ أَنفُسِكُم. So yeah, that's the story. That was the day that I don't want to say I took the Quran seriously, because I think I was taking it seriously, but I was given a motivation to complete the Quran, number one, but also know the verses that I'm reading and the context of those verses. I'm not saying obviously I know them in depth, but I knew some of the meanings of the Quran, but I could assign the verses I'm reading and what they mean rather than just reading whatever. I was more motivated, and I was, my love for the Quran increased as well because of the context of verses and everything else. So now that's my story of divorce in the Quran. That story has actually gone, it is quite viral. I'm surprised you don't know it. But until now, people don't know it's me. So people narrate the story. So I've told people in private gatherings and stuff like that as a joke. They've told other people. And now I've seen clips and people mentioning it online. I've never told it publicly now. Sahih.
I understand why you would think, okay, from now I need to know the meanings when I recite. But why would it motivate you to complete it?
It was almost as though so that I can recite the correct verses in the correct situations and scenes.